You're listening to the 49 Carats Podcast, a 49ers Goldmine production with Stephanie Sanchez.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another edition of the 49 Carats Podcast. I'm your host, Steph. It's Sunday, July 30th. The 49ers were back in action today after having the day off yesterday on Saturday. So how did they do? We're going to talk about that and the latest updates from today's session. And joining me to do that today is Nicholas McGee from A to Z Sports. Glad to have you on, Nick. How you doing?
I'm doing very well, Steph. How are you?
I'm not bad. I was just mentioning before we went live, like I'm back in the Bay. I'm gonna be at camp like the rest of the practices this week. So I'm feeling really good about that and excited to see these guys finally in pads, because I think that will really give us a better look at least the trenches and maybe the running backs as well, how some of these guys are doing.
Yeah. I think the pad is always where the switch gets flicked a little bit. Now it's you have to take it with a caveat when they're still running around in kind of shorts and t-shirts. But when the serious business really starts going this week as we build towards those first preseason games, we can get a look at these guys in a kind of something resembling a game situation again finally.
Yeah, for sure. So before we talk about what happened in today's practice, I just really quickly want to recap what we know of camp so far, what happened last week, right? So Brock Purdy fully cleared. He's back throwing. The 49ers, though, are still, adhering to 2 days on, 1 day off. And actually, Kyle spoke with the media today and said that it's actually 2 days on and 2 days off for Brock, which is why he was off today. But he'll move down to just 1 day off in between throwing in about 6 days from now, is what Kyle said. So Purdy practiced 3 times, I believe, last week. And in all those times, he operated as the sole QB1 in those practices. And that left Lance and Darnold to split the second and third team reps. And in Friday's session, Trey Lance had just 5 passes in 11 on 11 periods compared to Darnold's 7. And not only that, but their reps were said to be about 20 minutes apart. So you imagine while Darnold's throwing, Trey Lance is waiting off to the side for 20 minutes and vice versa. And as you can imagine, that did bring up some frustration among fans of the team, fans of Lance, fans of a fair competition. And so I want to ask you, Nick, did you feel like this was unfair to Lance and Darnold, the way that they're splitting these reps?
I don't think so. I think I saw a good point from Kyle, who runs SB Nation, Niners Nation, that I think he was referencing the Tim Kawakami article about when they settled on Purdy and everything. I think Kyle Shanahan is just finally enjoying some clarity at the quarterback position. He, over those 7, obviously we don't count the game in Philadelphia because he barely played in the end, but over those 7 games, he saw a quarterback that kind of was giving him everything he wants anyway. He was going to kind of read it and throw it. He can be really decisive with the football and had that playmaking ability as well. And even though he didn't go deep very often, we saw him go deep with some success to Kissel against Washington and stuff. So, and he gives him that ability to run the ball as well. You can still do the QB option stuff, getting outside the pocket and on the move from time to time. So I think over the course of those 8 games, he saw it's like, this is finally going to be, after so many years of uncertainty, this is finally going to be like my guy. And I think he just wants to get that guy as much reps as he can, although they're being quite safe with him in the elbow. When he's on the field, he's making it quite clear that this is his guy. And I don't think it's necessarily him not wanting to give reps to Lance and Darnold. I think he just wants his guy who he's finally settled on to be as ready as possible. And I think that's the cutting the long and the short of it, essentially.
Yeah, that's a great point. And so on Friday, the way that I thought about it was, you're doing both Lance and Darnold a disservice by limiting their reps when, if you could just cut Brandon Allen, for example, who, clearly is at the bottom of the pecking order. Those guys, Lance and Darnold, would have more opportunities, not just to, better stack their days, but also for you to evaluate them, right? So that's what I'm thinking about. How are you supposed to properly evaluate these guys if they're not getting a lot of reps? But I've thought about it a lot since then, and I've come to this conclusion and some of these points like you actually just made too. But one, camp is all about taking advantage of the opportunities you have, even if those opportunities are limited, right? So Sam Darnold, it seemed like he was unaffected by those circumstances of having, few reps. He was able to have some solid days, and so that being said, we can't then make excuses for Trey Lance, who is under the exact same circumstances as Darnold, maybe struggling to string together a solid performance, right? So, yes, it is harder to get into a rhythm with less reps, but at the same time, a quarterback is going to need to rise up, despite that. That, Darnold was able to do it. So, and my second point is like, we don't know how the 49ers even evaluate quarterbacks. We look at stats and we don't have all the context from, our couch, or even like if fans watching from the stands don't always get all the context. I believe like the 49ers, their coaches, they're more likely to look at maybe the decision making, are you making the right reads more so than, the stats and if they made the throw or not, right? Like we don't really know how they evaluate the position, but clearly like they feel confident they can evaluate and make decisions on the quarterbacks despite seeing these limited reps. So, who are we to say that they're wrong, right? Until we see how it all plays out. And at the end of the day, what we're spending so much time talking about is probably, like you said, this is the backup position that we're talking about here between Lance and Darnold, because Brock Purdy, he has the starting role sold up, like bearing any setbacks or any injury. So Lance and Darnold are realistically just fighting for a backup spot at this point. And why are we so invested in this, right? Like, why are we so invested in the backup position?
I think there's an element of just PTSD from over years of just like the idea that one of these guys is going to get hurt, and if like it's week 4 plays on the shelf and Lance has had as many reps or whatever like that, and there's probably an element of that PTSD and why Brandon Allen gets a lot of reps, because Shanahan knows after last year it's like they had to go to Josh Johnson who wasn't ready. I better get my 4th quarterback who's probably on the practice squad all the reps. It sounds like he's pretty like keen on keeping 4 of them. So I think there's an element of that in both why we're so invested and why Kyle might just be keeping 4 rounds. Like, we can't have this happen again. I need 4 guys that are going to be ready all to go at any point. And I think over time, if depending on what kind of schedule they stick to, if it's just one day off, like you're saying, in 6 days' time, I think Kyle will probably see that as enough opportunity for Lance and Donald to get these reps. And if the player's going to continue to have these rest days, he's going to think you're going to have so many more camp practices. You're going to have the joint practices with the Raiders. You're going to have the preseason games. He's going to see that as enough over the time, I would think.
Yeah, and also like on days where Brock doesn't practice, like today, Sunday, like we saw Lance and Darnold get plenty of reps, right? So really, like this complaining of limited reps is a moot point. Like when you look at the full, sample size of what we're going to have at the end of training camp, right?
Yeah.
So I guess that's kind of just what I've come away with, all the thought between Lance and Darnold. So, Nick, let's dive into what happened today. It seemed like the defense started off strong the first couple of plays during team period, as they had been all camp. Like, that's all we've heard so far. The defense. And it seemed like Kyle was like, hell no, not today. NFL Network is here. I am going to turn it up. And it seemed to be a big day for the offense, and in particular, the quarterbacks and Brandon Aiyuk. All the quarterbacks seem to have a great connection with Aiyuk. It's a real thing. We also got the first look at red zone period. I know John Chapman, who I had on the show last week, he said that Brandon Aiyuk scored 3 touchdowns in about 7 red zone plays in today's practice. Like, that is insane. And so it seemed like both Lance and Darnold benefited from targeting Aiyuk, and that's really no surprise because he was doing the same thing in last year's camp. I think the question is, will this carry on into the season? Like, will the 49ers feature him a little bit more? Like, we know he has a talent. It's more so, is he going to get the ball?
Yeah, I mean, that's just going to be, there's so many mouths to feed that you have to wonder about that. But Yeah, any Brandon Aiyuk content is a fever dream for me. It's yes, I tweeted today. I've been on this guy since 2020. It was my draft crush way back. I was dancing around my living room when they traded up for him, and I've been defending him since the doghouse days, early 2021. So all of the past kind of season and now into training camp now has just been a fever dream for me. And yeah, this guy seems to have the ability to develop a rapport with any quarterback. Really, you saw it in 2021 when Lance got the start against Houston. He was kind of the guy he was going to. You saw the kind of like the glimpses of that rapport there, and they spent all that offseason, the subsequent offseason together, kind of building that. So he's got a good rapport with Lance. He's obviously developed it with Purdy down the stretch last season. Seems to be meshing well with Darnold. He's a tremendous route runner. He's kind of embraced the physical side of things as well as an excellent blocker now. For as much as the receiver can be an excellent blocker, no fear go over the middle and can create after the catch. And yeah, it really just is a question of like, I feel like there's a different hot hand at every point of the season in terms of like who gets the ball, and then you'll have stretches where it's all George Kittle. You have stretches last season where Aiyuk was dominating. So, but if they're all healthy, there's no reason why, if you've got Debo kind of working underneath, or if him and McCaffrey in the backfield, like creating so much attention, you saw at times last year when Debo and McCaffrey were both on the field, like the voids that left elsewhere, which is an absolute dream for a wide receiver like Brandon Aiyuk. So I think he should be looking for another 1,000-yard season, like he barely got over that mark last year. It's just a question of how, like you say, like how many balls he gets or how far he goes over that mark. Because typically in all the efficiency metrics, kind of like DVOA and stuff, he's in the top 10 in those kind of things, and EPA as well. So he's a very efficient receiver. He probably just doesn't get the due league wide because he doesn't get the ball as much. But if he gets a few more balls this year, it could be like he could take it to another level, because I don't see too many flaws in his game these days.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there are few wide receivers, I think, that can transcend their quarterbacks.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think about a receiver like Larry Fitzgerald. It didn't matter who his quarterback was. It's kind of same thing with like DeAndre Hopkins. There are few receivers like that, right? And I kind of see, at least in camp, like I see that Brandon Aiyuk definitely has the abilities to be that same kind of receiver who is every quarterback's best friend. And I know that the unfortunate thing about Brock Purdy and him, I guess, like rehabbing in the offseason and not getting that time, to work on the chemistry with his receivers, I think that maybe he won't have as much time as, Lance and Darnold to build on that connection that they're building right now. But I hope that once the season gets going, like Brock Purdy really looks to Aiyuk, because out of all the guys that maybe Purdy connected with last year, maybe Aiyuk was, he was at the bottom of the list. I mean, Kittle was clearly at the top.
Yeah.
Then you had like McCaffrey, and, Aiyuk, he had some plays with him too. But again, I just feel like he should be featured a little bit more, and he should be seen as an outlet just as much as McCaffrey is seen as an outlet, because Aiyuk gets open. So I hope we see that this year.
Yeah, definitely. And I think what benefits him maybe is that they don't like play too many, like they play plenty of 11 personnel, but they play plenty of like formations where it's only two wide receivers. So there's a lot of 12, there's a lot of 21. I'm guessing they'll play some 22 now. They've got two tight ends as well. So there might even sometimes where he's the only wide receiver on the field. So that kind of plays to his benefit. Like they don't really have they have George Kittle, who's obviously a huge target hole, but they don't have a third wide receiver. So say for Juwan Jennings on third down. So it's either going to be him or Debo. So that kind of plays into his hands a little bit as well. And like I said, I would continue to be very, very happy to see Brandon Aiyuk thrive, because it plays into my brand very, very well.
For sure. Now I want to go back to the quarterbacks here for a bit. We got some stats from today's 11-on-11 session. So Lance, he had 16 total reps in the period, 12 of those with the first team. Because again, even though, Lance is getting the first crack at first team reps, him and Darnold are still splitting those. So there's sometimes where Lance gets first team reps, there's sometimes where he gets second team reps, and vice versa. And so he finished 5 of 8 today. He did open with a nice deep pass to Kittle off of play action. And he also had a 20-ish yard touchdown to Chris Conley during the red zone period. But there were reports that Trey Lance missed an open throw to Debo in the flat. And I want to talk about this for a bit because it seems like Trey Lance can make the tough throws look easy, but there's still some inconsistencies with making the easy throws. And I feel like we need to see more of that consistency. And Kyle probably needs to see more of that consistency in order to trust him a little bit more, right?
Yeah. It's kind of like, I was having this conversation, like I had David Lombardi from the Athletic reply to one of my tweets, and I referenced like the deep ball upside of Lance could like tip the scales in his favor if Darnold hasn't been great historically, like throwing deep, and obviously Lance is the guy that he invested in that can access other areas of the field that we haven't really seen the Niners access over the years in terms of going downfield. That's the whole reason they drafted him in the first place. So I was like, that could tip the scales in his favor maybe, and he came back to like, no, it's the inconsistency in the short game. And I see where he's coming from. Is Kyle obviously operates so often over the middle of the field and the kind of underneath areas. Like you got to be able to hit them time and time again for his offense to work. So I kind of think he's right, and I think you're right as well. It's like that's kind of like the maddening bit of it, really. With Trey, because he has the arm to make all the throws, but it just inexplicably sometimes some of these throws just end up in the dirt when he's going short and stuff. And I don't know, like I'm not enough of a quarterback expert to know why that's happening without seeing like any like practice takeoffs we don't have access to. So it's very frustrating, but at least we seem to be seeing some signs of progress from like the quarterbacks. So we tend this time of year to get, this guy is doing great, this guy's doing great. But the reports from the quarterbacks from the Niners, people that are there have been quite honest, and they've been quite keen to say these guys have struggled initially. But then on Friday, we saw that Purdy got better as the practice went on, and then today we've had Lance and Darnold. That was their best day. So at least you are seeing like clear signs of progress from the first few days of camp to now. Is that there's an upward trajectory there, and both guys seem to have their best day today.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to make it seem like it's all doom and gloom with Lance or any of these other quarterbacks, because I do think that, Lance, by all accounts, seemed to have had a good day today. But I do just feel like if at some point we're questioning, well, why is Lance still in this competition with Darnold, right? I think maybe we can point to some of those, missing the easy throws and how important the short game is, even though it's like maybe this cliche. And I know David Lombardi gets some heat for even saying it. You can't underestimate the short game, but I mean, it is big. That's the foundation of the offense. Yeah. I mean, you have to be able to hit those throws. But anyway, Darnold, he also had 16 reps during 11 on 11s today, so they were pretty equal, they were equal in the amount of reps they got. Although just 4 of Darnold's were with the first team, so he spent most of the time operating with the second team. But he finished 8 of 10, and he had 3 touchdowns during red zone periods. He was apparently cooking on the crossing routes today as well, which is great to hear. Yeah. And for the second straight practice, Darnold was the slightly better of the two. At least that's what people who were there have, kind of mentioned. So it certainly appears that Darnold is stacking his days, which is, that's good for him.
Yeah, and like you said, those crossing routes, those short throws, when you've got receivers that are so good after the catch as the Niners do, if you're going to make them, that's going to probably give you a bit of a leg up in Kyle Shanahan's eye. So it will be really interesting. Because obviously we're a little bit disconnected from training camp. I'm kind of like selfishly being on in where I am in the world, like looking forward to that first preseason game. So I can actually see this with my eyes over the course of a couple of quarters. It'll be really interesting to see who gets the first crack when Brock's not on the field and how they perform, because it does seem quite even. But if Darnold keeps stacking these days, we could see a world where it tilts towards him pretty quickly.
Yeah, and with the pads coming on starting tomorrow, Monday, I mean, that can also be a turning point for how we see some of these reps kind of split. So yeah, that's one of the things that of course, like me going there tomorrow, I'm going to be paying attention to the quarterbacks. I mean, we all are, right? So yeah. Brock Purdy is going to be back out there too. So how does he look throwing with pads on as well? So all those things. I want to talk about the running backs and in particular Jordan Mason, because it seems like we're hearing a lot of reports that he looks great running. He's still running hard, still powerful. John Chapman said he looks, quote, worlds ahead of all other 49ers quarterbacks, end quote. 49ers running backs, end quote, today. And remember, CMC did not practice today. So, Jordan Mason got a bulk of those opportunities. But the one thing with Jordan Mason that I'm like, man, I hope that gets fixed before the start of the season is fumbling. He didn't fumble at all last season, but he has 3 fumbles through camp already, and he had 2 today. So I'm a little, I don't want to be concerned about it, but it's something that I got to keep my eye on. So I don't know if apparently they were on punch outs today from the defense. So I don't know if we should just give more credit to the defense. Maybe it was just a better play by them, but as a running back, you got to be able to hold on to the football as well. So hopefully it's not something that spills into the season for Mason.
Yeah, it's ball security with Shanahan is a biggie. Like he hates drops by wide receivers and he hates fumbles by running back. So Jordan can't have many more of those. He might find himself in that aforementioned doghouse. He was. If I'm going to celebrate my wins of Aiyuk, I'll call myself out on my losses. Everybody was going on the Jordan Mason hype train last year. I didn't see it in preseason, but he proved me wrong. He was excellent when he did get his chance in the regular season. But like you say, he's got to work on these fumbles because there have been positive reports about Ty Davis-Price. Was looking like he's going to be the third round bust after the infamous Trey Sermon pick that didn't work out. But Kyle said today that he thinks he's already taken that jump and he seems like he looks more explosive. So it'll be really interesting to see what he does when he put the pads on tomorrow, see if that carries through to next week, because it seems like it's been a really positive start for him. So that competition maybe for that kind of like third power back role is going to try and wear down defenses could be a little bit more interesting than it was last year.
Yeah, I don't know like what the 49ers are going to do at the running back position, like when it cuts down to 53, because they have such a strong group, like from top to bottom. I mean, you got McCaffrey, Elijah Mitchell is still, playing well. And I know health has been more so the issue with Mitchell, but if he can stay healthy, like he's making this team, of course. And then Jordan Mason, who's on the up and up, still, and Kalen Laborn, who, there's a few people I've seen are huge Kalen Laborn fans as well. And I haven't seen too much of him to really have a say myself. So I am excited to see him at camp, but man, it's going to be a really tough decision when it comes down to cuts. And that's a good problem to have for this team. I'm sure they're thankful for it.
It would be very Kyle Shanahan to unearth another undrafted free agent running back that makes the team. But they'll probably carry for all these guys because the point you made about Elijah Mitchell, his injury history is very spotting. Same for McCaffrey, although McCaffrey fought through a lot last year and didn't miss a game to my knowledge, to my memory anyway, from after the trade. So they'll probably carry for all these guys simply because Kyle knows how quickly that injury bug can bite and probably one on the practice squad as well. But it'll just be really interesting to see, like you say, what happened to Davis-Price and whether Laborn can make an impression when he gets to preseason and stand out, maybe get himself on the practice squad at the very least.
It's like you want Kalen Laborn to look good, but not too good where like other teams are noticing, right? You want to keep it a secret as long as you can so that you can maybe stash him onto the practice squad. I know that's what the 49ers would like, but you just can't control these guys once they get out in the preseason and they're playing against reserves. I mean, the same thing happened with Jordan Mason last year. He looked too good. They could not get rid of him, right? So hopefully they can kind of hide Kalen Laborn, but we'll just have to wait and see. The other guy that I'm really excited about, now going to the defensive side of the ball, Drake Jackson, right? Yeah. We know that he had bulked up, but the question going into camp was, okay, will the new physique translate onto the field? And so far, granted, still without pads, it's still just training camp, but so far it appears that he is poised to take that next step, right? So we saw reports of a play today in which Drake Jackson went stride for stride, covering Elijah Mitchell down the sideline on a wheel route. and, breaking up the play. Like that's a pretty impressive play coming from a second-year player. We know that he has the athleticism. Like, I don't think that's ever been the issue with him. And that's like a point that I've made. Like, the talent was always there. It's just the conditioning that needed to be at that NFL level for him to last like a full season and be effective a full season. And a full season for the 49ers is ideally, 20-ish games, right?
Yeah.
So that's a whole nother beast right there. So knowing that he's at a point where his conditioning is, way better, I think we're going to see more of that talent shine, and he's going to stay on the field longer than we saw him last year. And I mean, the 49ers need that, right? Opposite Nick Bosa.
100%. And they've kind of, although Kyle kind of criticized them a little bit after last season for kind of wearing down the stretch and not being there for what they needed. And in the last few weeks of the season and in the playoffs, I think he was inactive for every playoff game. They've kind of given him that starting defensive end role across from Nick Bosa almost by default. There's nobody else really there to challenge him. And I know they've got Cleveland Farrell and Austin Bryant and a couple of others behind him, but there's nobody else really there to challenge him. So that conditioning, like you said, that extra weight is all for, you've got to be able to hold up in the run game. We need you on the field. But if that's all works, it seems like it has. He can be a real breakout player for them because particularly in the first half of last season, you could see that pass rushing kind of prowess that he has. He's quite a technical pass rusher. He's good with his hands. He's explosive. It's all about get off with the Niners. Everybody knows that with Chris Kaserik. He can get off the ball and he can jerk offensive linemen backwards. And he has that playing in coverage as well. He was kind of miscast at USC. Then they played him in coverage a lot, which was frustrating when you watched him in pre-draft tape to not see him doing what you expect a pass rusher to do. But it seems to have served him well in coverage, and he seems pretty comfortable there. The Niners dropped him to coverage a couple of times last season, and then he's running down the left sideline with Elijah Mitchell today, and that's good for Steve Wilks as well, because then that opens up zone blitzes and then simulated pressures where he might drop into coverage. So it just increases what you can do when you have a player who's that athletic and that versatile. And I really hope we do see it from him, because there's a lot of promise there if he can capitalize on the opportunities that are going to come, because he's going to have Armstead and Hargrave and Bosa, so he's going to see a lot of one-on-ones, and he's got to be able to take advantage, because he can have a big year if he does.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. It definitely a project for Chris Kaserik, but I mean, if anyone can turn him into a star pass rusher, it'd be him, right? So we'll see. But speaking of Steve Wilks, I saw that there were a lot of blitzes today from the defense in practice, and Kyle Shanahan did say that helped open things up for the offense a bit. So obviously, Kyle, he could take advantage of something that the defense is doing and use it against them, right? And today, I guess it was the blitzes, but I think the one takeaway that we can get from that is, what we've been kind of figuring this whole time is that Wilks is going to blitz a lot more than we've seen in the past. And with this group of guys, mind you, Nick Bosa isn't even out there yet. With this group of guys, like that could, make for problems for opposing quarterbacks. And so I'm excited to see how that looks in season, and how, when they're starting the game plan against certain quarterbacks and seeing guys who struggle against the blitz, just having that in your arsenal is going to be really valuable for this team, I think.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see like where he concentrates most of those blitzes. I think he's just excited at having as much options as he's got. He's raving about his defensive line. He loves the athleticism at the linebacker, which of course you do with Fred Warner and Dre Greenlaw. And then I think he's pretty keen on secondary blitzes as well, which is why they signed Isaiah Oliver, because he's pretty good at blitzing. And I think Jair Brown's going to get sent on a lot, and there's obviously Talanoa Hufanga as well. So he's got two safeties there that he's probably going to blitz, because Jair Brown did a lot at Penn State as well. So it's just going to be really interesting to see like where he concentrates those blitzes, because he has so many options in theory. And if they can get it to a point where it's not burning them consistently, because we know the blitz does create more opportunities for opposing offensive, if you can get the ball out on time, then that could be really successful. That hinges on kind of the outside corners playing like they did down the stretch last year as well. We saw Chevarius Ward and Diamond pretty impressively for a second-year player start to get really good in man coverage down the stretch. In the playoffs, you had Lenore running routes for Tyler Lockett, which was a hugely impressive thing to do and really encouraging to see. So if they can continue to hold up on the outside in man, then don't doubt he'll have no hesitation in throwing up some creative blitzes to create some more negative plays.
Yeah, for sure. And like that's the other aspect of it too, right? Like Wilkes, being a more secondary a coach with more secondary
Mm-hmm.
experience and background, that helps this unit take another step as well and be ready for, okay, when we are blitzing, like look out for these kinds of things. And maybe you can make a break on the ball, or things like that. There's opportunities for not just sacks when you're talking about blitzes, but also you can get that errant throw from a
Mm-hmm.
quarterback that's going to lead to an interception, and just the trickle down effect of how that impacts a secondary. I think from what we're hearing, like, and what we've kind of seen in some like video clips here and there, Steve Wilkes is very hands on with this secondary, right? And
Mm-hmm.
even though he's the defensive coordinator, he oversees everything now, right? But he's still, wanting to be very involved with the secondary group. And I think that's great for this group who are, there's a lot of young guys in
Mm-hmm.
that group. So I think that's just going to help them take that next step as well. And I'm really excited about it. Trivarius Ward, I guess, has missed the last 3
Yeah.
practices due to a groin injury. And so we know that he's going to be one of the starters as long as he's healthy.
Mm-hmm.
But some of these other guys, maybe it's a good thing that they've gotten an extra look at some of these other corners as well.
Yeah, they're going to be very careful with Trevarius Ward just because he is kind of like a Jenga piece almost. He's kind of an underrated Jenga piece in that if you take him out, then we're suddenly looking at a very shaky situation at the cornerback.
That's a good analogy right there.
Yeah, as good as Lenore has been, you don't want it to be Lenore and somebody else. I don't know who that somebody else would be at the minute. It's just something I've brought up a couple of times, that the depth at outside corner is a bit shaky, so you kind of want to protect Javarius Ward as much as you can. And I guess kind of like Wilkes being as hands-on with the secondary coach is because he trusts like the other position coaches so much. He knows that Chris Casere's going to do the work of the defensive line and get results. And they've got a linebacker coach he trusts in Johnny Holland, and obviously they understand what they've got a linebacker as it is, so he can kind of take a hands-on role with the secondary while obviously having the control of the overriding philosophy of the defense. So it's kind of like a thing of trust in the other position coach you've got there, that he can lead them to it and kind of focus on what his specialty is, which they've got a new secondary coach in Daniel Brooks as well, so he can kind of be a mentor to him at the same time and bring him along. So it's I don't think it's too much of a surprise to see him getting so hands-on when he knows he's got the likes of Kaserik, who can just I saw a fun quote today that they asked Shanahan if Kaserik had mellowed out a bit, and he said, "Yeah, but don't mistake that for being mellow. He's still very, very loud," which is just a great quote from Kyle there.
Yeah, maybe just saving his voice for the season. So, but yeah, I mean, this defense also top to bottom is just so stacked. So, again, like I feel like going back to last year, the secondary was probably that unit that you can look at and say needed to. There was room for improvement, right?
Yeah.
And I think now with Wilkes there and giving that extra coaching is going to help them take that next step. But also, like the reason that I wanted to bring up the secondary is because Brandon Aiyuk, who we mentioned had an awesome day today, he spoke with the media after practice, and he brought up one of the rookie UDFA corner, Deshaun Jameson, said that he's caught his eye, said he's out there balling, he's out there working. So again, like it's great to know that some of these guys are getting those opportunities and making some noise in camp. And for Brandon Aiyuk to notice you, not just to notice you, but to, I guess praise you in the presser, because we know he's not too fond of the defense during camp. But for him to say this about one of those guys, like I think that says a lot about, Jameson and how he's doing. And I kind of wonder, and we've been wondering this probably for the last couple years, Ambry Thomas, like, is this the year that is make or break for him, or this camp is make or break for him? I think it is, right? Like time's kind of running out for Ambry Thomas to, step up and prove that he could be on this team. And I think with Ward being out, like Ambry Thomas is probably getting those extra looks, but I don't know if I've heard that he's making the most of that opportunity.
Yeah, it's been kind of all quiet on that front, and I'm similar to you. I'm very interested in that because I was a big Ambry Thomas defender, even when he was struggling a little bit in 2021 initially, when he finally got a taste of the action, when injuries kind of forced him into it finally, and he had those initial rookie struggles, but I've never thought it was bad coverage. It was kind of, he was just getting beat at the catch point, and then towards the end of 2021, he finally seemed to get better at that area of the game, and obviously he had the interception against the Rams, which will forever live in franchise folklore, one of the biggest moments in the Shanahan era. But he just didn't carry it into year two. Like he had kind of the bad training camp. It's similar to maybe Brandon Aiyuk himself a couple of years ago, where he kind of sauntered into training camp thinking he'd made it a little bit, and he wasn't in shape, and he lost kind of ground to Samuel Womack and to Diarmuid Lenore and a few others, and found himself down the depth chart and barely played on defense at any point last year. So, but he's the only one they've got really, apart from they've signed Terrence Mitchell for a bit of veteran experience. But if you dive into Terrence Mitchell's numbers for any point last season, then they're not great. He has a lot of PBUs, but that's because he's getting thrown on a lot. So besides him, Ambry Thomas is the only other corner behind the top two on the outside that has got any kind of significant starting experience. So you would think they really want him to make that step so he can come in and rely on him. But there hasn't been any kind of noise, like neither positive or non-negative at the minute. So, and if he starts getting pushed by a UDFA who has been playing very well by all accounts in practice and was very good in OTAs and minicamp, that will say a lot for which trajectory Ambry Thomas is following. So yeah, it'd be really interesting to see how the cornerbacks develop, because they definitely need somebody to emerge there, because obviously the fifth round pick, Darrell Luter, got injured as well. He seems like he's working through quite a bad bone bruise, so they really do need somebody to step up to just make us feel a little less nervous about what would happen if either of the top two or outside corner got injured.
Right on. Yeah. Shout out Mariah. What's going on, Mariah? Glad you're in the comments. Thank you guys for tuning in. Just I think we've covered most of what happened in camp today. Just a couple things just for kind of fun I wanted to discuss. So Frank Gore, who he just got a job with the front office, the 49ers front office. As of yesterday, he was signing a contract with them to be part of an advisor for the front office. So we had heard, I think during the draft process, during that time, that he was, trying to get into scouting. And it seems like, that interest in him being around the team has, led to this role now. And that's awesome for Frank Gore. He's one of my favorite 49ers ever, hands down. And so to have him close to the team at any capacity, I think is awesome for the team. And it just makes my young 49er fan heart happy.
Yeah. Back in the organization, just as the team's competing for a Super Bowl every year, Frank Gore might finally get a ring that he absolutely deserves. Little conspiracy theory.
That's so true.
Yeah, get all that team need rings. Just get them all jobs somehow. Joe Staley, Patrick Willis,
right?
Get them all back in the building just so they can get a ring. Little conspiracy theory on my part: Frank Gore Jr. is in college. It's a miss. I don't know where he's draft eligible, but now you've got Frank Gore in the scouting staff. Maybe it could be a couple of years from Frank Gore Mark II if the Niners need a running back in a couple of years.
That's a good point.
But now they've got Kyle Shanahan, they've got Bobby Taylor, and now they've got Frank Gore in the scouting staff as well. I think they're pretty set for scouting running backs, which they've been pretty good at over the recent years as well. So that's only going to help.
Yeah, for sure. And Deshaun Goldson as well, former 49ers safety, joining the staff via the Bill Walsh NFL Diversity Coaching Fellowship. And he's going to help coach the DBs as well. So good for him too, getting into coaching and doing it with his former team as well. I know he's very fond to a lot of 49er fans as well, known of course for his hard hitting. So hopefully he shows our guys how to do that as well, but not to the point where they're getting flags, because the NFL has changed quite a bit since the days of Goldston. But
he used to get flagged a lot back then. I was just he's not survived now.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, that's just exciting and a little bit of nostalgia as well. And so Gore, Alex Smith, Mike Shanahan, and Ed McCaffrey were all present at camp today. Of course, Gore, now is going to be there several days or maybe every day now that he's part of the front office. And Mike Shanahan, I saw he's been around. He was also around quite a bit in last year's camp. So it's just cool to have all those guys, on the field and watching practice. That's one of my favorite things of like camp when former players just come and see, what the new kids are doing.
Yeah, the Niners organization, particularly since Lynch and Shanahan, is very, very keen on having these like legends around the play, like, around the
Yeah.
current players around it. It definitely rubs off because you're gonna have like new players coming in every year and new rookies, and so it's good to have people that like can preach about the history of the organization stuff and be mentors to people as well, like keeping veterans around and former players around the building can only be positive, like the culture in the building as well. And that's something that Lynch and Shanahan are big on. And eventually I'm going to get myself across to the Bay for training camp and just be able to take all that in and see all these legends on the sideline, because it sounds like a hell of a time every year.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you definitely need to come out for one of those. It's great energy. But I thought I'd end on that positive note. Not that the talking about camp wasn't positive. I thought it was a pretty good day for the team, but just like to end on that nostalgia. So Nick, thank you so much for joining me today to talk about camp. Really enjoyed it. Plug your Twitter and where people can find your content.
Yeah, so I recently joined up at A to Z Sports, which is a fantastic sports website, and check it out. It's a team that's growing all the time. We cover not quite all 32 teams yet, but I think we're getting there. And I cover the Niners and to a lesser extent the Seahawks, but those are my two main beats these days. So if you want any Niners or Seahawks coverage, I'll post a link on my Twitter page, which is Nick Z or whatever it's called now. I don't know what it's called. I'm still calling it Twitter. I think everybody else knows calling
Twitter,
it
yeah,
Z or X, whatever it is. Z. So I'm at Nicholas McGee 24 on there. You'll find me pretty easily if you put that in. I don't think there's many other Nicholas McGee's out there on Twitter that have got much of a profile, so that's good. And I post all my work up on there. I'll be covering the Niners all the way through camp, preseason, season, hopefully all the way to Super Bowl in February. So yeah, check me out either of those places.
Yeah, make sure you follow Nick. He puts out some great content. And again, Nick, thanks for joining me. And for all you guys tuning in, make sure you like this video. Make sure you subscribe if you have not yet. I'll be at camp the rest of this week pretty much, and the pads come on tomorrow. So I'll have a first account on how that goes, and I'll be live again tomorrow to talk about that. But for now, have a good rest of your Sunday and the rest of your weekend, people. Peace.